Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now £20 won't buy you much in the world of PC components. It certainly won't buy you a graphics card these days, that's for sure. At least not one you'd want to try and game with anyway. That's why when I made a cheeky offer of £20 plus postage for what should be an entire Acer Aspire PC, I was quite surprised when the seller accepted my offer. The specs at this stage were a mystery to me. The only thing I knew for certain is that it isn't working quite as intended according to the previous owner. Despite the issues it may have, cosmetically it doesn't look too bad. At least that's what I would have said if I didn't break the thing even more before even switching it on. This expansion slot flap was the first item to fall victim to my clumsy sausage fingers, but little did I know I'd have bigger problems to worry about going forward. After breaking the outside of the case, it was time to do some more accidental damage to the inside, and it was at this point that I noticed that this thing had never been opened before. The irritatingly but purposely placed warranty sticker was still intact. Now I always say this, but before tinkering around inside any new or used PC, make sure to test it first. This one booted up just fine and was ready for a cleanup and a fresh copy of Windows. After removing the screws and trying to ignore the huge Wi-Fi dongle that left me feeling ever so slightly intimidated, it was time to poke around inside. It's a worrying sight seeing an integrated processor sitting atop a motherboard, and at this point I had no doubt that this PC was terrible. The fact that it wasn't working was beneficial not only to the PC and myself, but possibly the entire global population, none of whom would have to experience the subpar processing power of this small form factor failure. Here we are then after a few minutes worth of disassembly, prepping the PC for a quick clean. I'm going to use the air duster again today to remove any loose dust, but to be honest, this machine only has a thin layer of filth. The integrated CPU inside this thing will probably run just fine without this tiny fan, but we are going to keep it anyway as it works just fine and will still make all the difference when it comes to thermals. I am going to unscrew it and give it a more thorough clean. You can see that the fan has no real holes to screw into, it just sort of screws into the heatsink itself, which makes it seem like an afterthought, but like I said, it will make a difference to the running temperatures. With the PC cleaned and the DVD drive and hard drive tray thing put back in its correct place, it's time to install an operating system. I was tempted to go with 7, but for some reason the system didn't detect any Windows 7 DVDs or USBs, and I couldn't get into the BIOS. This meant that I had to rely on Windows 10 as it was the only OS that booted from external media. Well, sort of anyway. The system got to the Windows 10 installation screen but didn't detect the hard drive. This was also the case after testing the drive in a few other systems. No big deal, right? I had a few spare ones lying around, so I replaced it with another 500GB model, and this let me continue on my way. Very briefly. This seemingly simple fix was short-lived because after another restart and several attempts to get into safe mode or the BIOS or anything, the PC stopped working altogether. It was at this point that I discovered that the motherboard had died. Today just isn't going my way. Now it would be a shame to ruin the whole terrible vibe of this machine, and I certainly didn't want to spend too much money on something that at £20 I already feel that I paid too much for. That's when I decided to swap out the dead motherboard and awful integrated CPU for an alive motherboard and awful CPU. Luckily this AMD ITX board has been gathering dust for the most part of a year after being returned to me after an eBay sale. Apparently it was faulty, but I think the buyer instantly regretted their purchase and wanted it as far away from their property as possible, hence sending it back to me. There's nothing proprietary about this Acer PC, so all of the cables will plug right into another board, providing it fits inside the case, which this one does. The power cable was probably a couple of millimeters too short really, but threatening it with a trip to the landfill seemed to make it want to work. My main concern was the front panel connector. I thought that I might need to short the pins or get an adapter or something, but the secret to getting it working was just closing my eyes and plugging it in randomly along the header. In all honesty, I'm probably going to try and put Windows 7 or Linux on it before selling it, as those operating systems will run way better on this hardware, but because I've got a Windows 10 drive at hand, I went ahead and tested it with that. All I wanted to do at this point was check that the hardware worked fine and Windows 10 ran on it. Technically this isn't really the same PC anymore, and I was tempted to give up halfway through this video, but I don't want to see this thing end up at landfill, and I literally wouldn't have done anything else with the motherboard. I even ended up reusing the old fan, because my goodness, whoever thought that this CPU runs fine without one shouldn't be let anywhere near another component ever again. All I did was open Microsoft Paint, and these are the temperatures that we got without the fan. This fan, although puny, it did knock off 20 degrees from the idle temperatures. Don't get me wrong here, the computer is still awful, but now at least I know that it's working and it's ready for a more lightweight operating system. Before I go, it wouldn't be fair to ignore gaming performance. I've suffered enough today, so I thought I'd share the burden. The CPU is this thing's biggest problem, which is why it makes no sense adding a discrete graphics card to the board, because we'll be no better off. If you're wondering where MSI Afterburner is, it's disappeared into the same void as my patience. In all seriousness, the MSI Afterburner overlay won't run at the same time as any games without causing tremendous lag, or even more tremendous lag I should say. I just can't afford to lose any more frames. So as much as I enjoy saving old PCs, I'm wondering if this one was actually worth saving. It will still make for an acceptable everyday usage machine, and that's all I really expected all along. And as long as someone else can get some usage out of it, then I suppose it will have been worth the trouble. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. We will start to do more capable gaming PCs as of next week, and a couple of budget PC builds as well. Building a PC can be harder to do during these present times, but it can still be done, so hopefully I'll have a few systems for you. As always then, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.